My husband is the best person in the world. We've been in love since middle school. He kept every note I ever wrote to him back in 7th grade. Our life felt like a fairy tale. November 2nd, 2016 began as an ordinary morning in a quiet neighborhood of Mountain Gate, California. A young mother stepped out for a run, smiling as she kissed her children goodbye and told her husband she would be back soon. Then she disappeared around the corner, and no one realized that this would be the last normal moment of her life. A few hours later, her husband returned home to something that didn't make sense. The house was empty. The children had not been picked up from daycare, and his wife was not answering her phone. At first it felt like a delay, maybe a misunderstanding, but as minutes passed, that feeling quickly turned into something else. He opened the Find My iPhone app and drove to the last known location of her phone. What he found there was deeply unsettling. Her phone was lying on the ground, her headphones nearby, along with several strands of her blonde hair. The scene suggested that something had happened suddenly and with force, as if there had been a struggle. Struggling to stay calm, he called 911 and told the operator that he believed someone had taken his wife. What followed was in large-scale search efforts. Federal agents, local police, volunteers, and search dogs all joined the operation. The case quickly spread across the country, turning into a national story about a missing young mother of 2. Days passed, then weeks, but there were no answers. No confirmed sightings, no clear direction, nothing that could explain what had happened. And then, on the 22nd day, on the morning of Thanksgiving, everything changed. She was found on the side of a highway, more than 150 miles from her home. She was alive, but in a condition that raised even more questions than answers. She had been restrained, her hair was partially burned, and there were marks on her body that suggested she had been held against her will. She told a disturbing story about what had happened to her, and investigators promised they would find those responsible. At that moment, however, the focus was on the fact that she had survived and returned to her children. For many, it felt like a miracle. But 5 years later, the FBI would arrest this same woman and accuse her of fabricating the entire story. And even now, after the arrest, and after she served her sentence, no one can say with certainty what really happened, because this case is far more complicated and far darker than it first appears. So today we're going to try to understand where the truth ends and where the lies begin, and whether it's even possible to find clarity in a story where reality seems to shift every time someone speaks. The woman you're looking at is Sherri Papini, and at first glance, this looked like the story of a perfect life that suddenly turned into a nightmare. But the deeper you go into this case, the clearer it becomes. Nothing here is exactly what it seems. So maybe it really did feel like fate. In 2009, they got married, and by 2016 they already had 2 children, a son, Tyler, and a daughter, Violet. Sherri stayed home with the kids, while Keith worked at Best Buy. According to her sister, Sherri was an incredibly devoted mother, the kind people would half-jokingly call a supermom. They lived in a nice house in the quiet neighborhood of Mountain Gate, and if you looked only at their social media, their life seemed almost perfect. But that kind of image can be misleading, and it rarely tells the full story. On the surface, it's a warm, almost cinematic picture of a couple who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. But even relationships that look this stable have their limits. Back in 2016, neither Keith nor Sherri seemed to realize that. And then, at what looked like the peak of their life together, something unexpected happened. Sherri went out for a morning run and never came back. When Keith returned home around 5 p.m., the house was empty. The children weren't there. Sherri wasn't there either. The last message he had received from her came at 10:37 that morning. She had asked if he would be coming home for lunch. He didn't reply at the time. He didn't like checking his phone at work. It wasn't until around 1:30 p.m. that he finally responded with a short message. "Sorry, long day." Standing in the empty house, Keith didn't panic right away. Maybe she had stopped by a store, maybe something delayed her. But then he decided to call the daycare to check what time she had picked up the kids, and they told him she never came. That's the moment everything changed. He immediately called his mother, asked her to pick up the children, and got into the car to look for Sherri. He knew she had recently started running again, training for a Thanksgiving race, so his first thought was that she might still be out somewhere along her usual route. He opened the Find My iPhone app and saw that her phone was located about 2 kilometers from their home, near the area where their mailboxes were. When he arrived, Sherri wasn't there, but her phone was. Her headphones were lying nearby, and tangled in the cord were strands of her hair. For a moment, nothing made sense, and then everything did. He called 911. The call came in at 5:50 p.m. The operator asked how they could help, and Keith tried to explain, his voice strained, moving quickly between details. He said he had just come home from work and his wife was missing, which was unusual. The children hadn't been picked up from daycare. He had tried to find her, called the daycare, and then used the Find My iPhone app. It led him to the end of their street, where he found her phone and her headphones, and what looked like hair caught in the wires. He kept repeating that he was panicking, that something didn't feel right, that it looked like the headphones had been pulled off. The operator asked if he believed something had happened to her. "Yes," he said, essentially confirming what he was already afraid to say out loud. By the time the call ended, it was clear. This was no longer a missing person situation that could be explained by a delay or a misunderstanding. Something had happened. And almost immediately, the search began. From the very beginning, Sherri Papini's case drew an extraordinary amount of attention. At first it was covered by local news, then national outlets picked it up, and before long, the story had spread far beyond California. Federal and local authorities launched a major search. The FBI joined. They executed over 20 warrants and conducted hundreds of interviews, and still, there was nothing. No clear trail, no confirmed sightings, no real evidence pointing in any one direction. It was as if Sherri had simply vanished into thin air. The community was shaken. If it could happen to Sherri, people wondered who might be next. Keith, meanwhile, appeared devastated. He went on television, pleaded for his wife to be returned, and said he was willing to do anything to bring her home. Sherri's sister also spoke publicly, describing her as a wonderful person, a devoted mother, and a source of light in the lives of those around her. The family created a Facebook page called Bring Sherri Home, where they posted updates and tried to keep public attention on the case. As the days passed, then a week, then 2, there was still no sign of Sherri. At the same time, investigators naturally began to look closely at Keith. In cases like this, the husband is often among the first people examined, and for a simple reason. Statistically, when violence happens to a woman, the person responsible is often someone close to her. So Keith was thoroughly investigated. He took a polygraph test, and according to reports at the time, he passed. His alibi was carefully checked, and everything matched. There were no obvious inconsistencies, nothing that immediately raised suspicion. And yet, online, people continued to question him. They analyzed his 911 call, replaying it over and over, trying to catch a moment that sounded off, a word that didn't feel right, something that could suggest he wasn't telling the truth. At the same time, the family set up a GoFundMe page to raise money for the search. Donations came in quickly and in large numbers, eventually reaching nearly $50,000. The funds were meant to support search efforts, hire private investigators, and print flyers. It seemed like a community coming together in the face of tragedy, but that detail would become important later. Then on November 24th, 2016, Thanksgiving morning, everything changed. At around 4 a.m., police received a call from a truck driver who had been driving along a highway when he noticed a woman standing on the side of the road. She was near a road sign, restrained with chains, with a bag over her head. He stopped and called for help. When officers arrived and removed the bag, they realized they were looking at Sherri Papini. But the way she looked shocked everyone. Her hair had been cut and partially burned. There was a mark on her shoulder, as if something hot had been pressed against her skin. Her body was covered in bruises. Her nose appeared broken, and she had lost a significant amount of weight. Around 13 kilograms. She was taken to the hospital, where doctors confirmed multiple injuries and signs of prolonged physical abuse. When Sherri was finally able to speak, she told a disturbing story. According to her, she had been taken by 2 Hispanic women. She said they approached her during her run in a dark vehicle, forced her inside, and drove her away. After that, she claimed she was held in an unknown location, possibly a house or a trailer, but she could not say for certain. For most of the time, she said, her vision was restricted, either by a blindfold or a bag over her head. She described being kept chained in a room for days, subjected to repeated physical harm, having objects thrown at her, and being marked with a heated object. She said her hair had been cut and burned. She also claimed the women would play loud music, what she described as Mexican music, and fed her tortillas and beans. They rarely spoke to her, and when they did, it was in Spanish, which she said she did not understand. She described 2 Hispanic women, one older, one younger. And then, on November 24th, without any explanation, they let her go. She said they placed a bag over her head, drove her to the highway, and left her there. Why they took her remained unclear. Why they released her, also unclear, and who they were, completely unknown. When the news of her return became public, the reaction was immediate. The country exhaled in relief. She was alive. Keith gave interviews, saying that their prayers had been answered. He described the moment he saw his wife again. Exhausted, injured, but alive. "She's still my Sherri," he said, holding back tears. Her sister also spoke publicly, saying they had always believed she was strong enough to survive. But almost as quickly as relief came, so did doubt. There were too many unanswered questions. Why would the abductors release her? What was the motive in the first place? No ransom had ever been demanded. Her account lacked detail. She couldn't describe the place where she had been held. She couldn't recall the route they had taken. She hadn't heard anything that might help identify a location. And then there was the most critical piece of evidence: the DNA. When doctors collected samples from Sherri's body, they found male DNA on her clothing, something that didn't fit her story about 2 female abductors. At the same time, the physical evidence raised even more questions. Her phone and headphones did not appear to have been dropped during a struggle, and the strands of hair looked deliberately placed rather than pulled out by force. Altogether, the scene didn't match what investigators would expect from a violent abduction. Still, Sherri continued to stand by her story. She never took a polygraph test. Her lawyers advised against it. And at that point, investigators did not have enough evidence to formally accuse her of anything, so the case remained open. But the investigators did not let it go. They believed something was off, and they started digging deeper. First, they reviewed traffic and surveillance cameras along the route where Sherri had supposedly been taken. They found no evidence of a dark vehicle with 2 women matching her description. Then they examined her phone records, calls, messages, online activity, and that's where things started to shift. They discovered that, in the period leading up to her disappearance, Sherri had been communicating with several men online. And this wasn't casual conversation. It involved flirting and, at times, explicit exchanges. One of those men lived in Michigan. The 2 of them had been discussing a meeting in November, the same time Sherri disappeared. Investigators checked flight records, and yes, this man had flown to California shortly before she went missing. Then, the day after she was reported missing, he flew back to Michigan. Agents traveled there to interview him. He admitted that they had planned to meet, but claimed he changed his mind because Sherri never showed up. At that point, the lead didn't fully break the case, but it added another layer of doubt. Then investigators turned their attention to another man, James Reyes, someone Sherri had known for years. According to Reyes, their relationship had been on and off since the early 2000s. He described her as someone who often sought attention and told dramatic stories about her life, stories that didn't always match reality. That pattern was supported by earlier reports. In her late teens and early 20s, police had been called multiple times due to incidents involving Sherri, including property damage, unauthorized use of her father's bank card, and self-inflicted harm followed by accusations against others. Investigators also learned that she had previously disappeared without warning as a teenager, reinforcing concerns about a repeated pattern of behavior. When the FBI interviewed Reyes, he admitted that Sherri had been with him the entire time. He said she contacted him in October 2016, claiming she was having problems in her marriage and wanted to leave. He agreed to help, drove to Reading, and brought her back to his home in Costa Mesa. She stayed there for 22 days. Reyes claimed she rarely left the apartment, injured herself, and even created the mark on her shoulder. Eventually, she asked him to drive her to the side of the highway and leave her there, where she was later found. He said he believed she simply needed to get away, and only realized the scale of the situation after the case became national. This time, investigators took a different approach. They showed Sherri photographs of James Reyes' apartment. They showed her his closet and asked directly if this was the place where she had been held. Sherri said she didn't know. She wasn't sure. Then they showed her photos of several Hispanic women and asked if any of them had taken her. Again she said no, and that's when the tone of the interview changed. They told her, calmly and directly, that they already knew where she had been, that they had spoken to people involved, that they had evidence. According to investigators, Sherri reacted with what looked like shock. Then she asked for a moment alone with her husband. When detectives returned, she said something that didn't make sense. She told them she didn't want them to look for the women who had allegedly abducted her. Despite everything she had described, being restrained, starved, and harmed, she claimed those same women had allowed her to see her children every day. It was a statement that raised more questions than it answered. At that point, investigators made their position clear. They told her they were not looking for two unknown women, because they already knew who was responsible. They had identified the DNA found on her clothing. It belonged to James Reyes, and they knew her disappearance had been planned. Sherri denied everything, even when confronted with the evidence, even when told that Reyes had already confessed. She continued to insist on her story about two women. Then investigators asked her to step out of the room and spoke to Keith alone. He appeared genuinely shocked. He said he had never heard the name James Reyes before and had no idea that Sherri had been communicating with other men. From his perspective, their marriage had been stable. When Sherri returned and Keith was asked to leave, something shifted. Without him in the room, she changed part of her story. She admitted that she had been in contact with Reyes and with other men as well. Men I shouldn't have been talking to, she said. But when it came to the abduction itself, she did not back down. She still insisted that she had been taken, despite everything. On March 3rd, 2022, Sherri Papini was arrested. She was charged with mail fraud and making false statements to a federal agent, charges that carried a potential sentence of up to 20 years in prison. At that point, investigators also began to examine the financial side of the case. The GoFundMe campaign had raised nearly $50,000, money donated by people who believed they were helping find a missing mother. Just 2 weeks after Sherri's return, Keith transferred over $31,000 from that account into his personal bank account, followed by a smaller transfer to Sherri. Shortly after, part of that money was used to pay off personal credit card debt, but that wasn't the only source of money. Sherri also applied for compensation through a California program designed to support victims of violent crime. Using her story, she received dozens of payments between 2017 and 2021. In total, The amount of money obtained through these claims and donations reached approximately $230,000. Money given in good faith, money that people believed was helping a victim. Meanwhile, the investigation itself had required significant resources: federal, state, and local agencies, search teams, volunteers, warrants, interviews. All of it cost time and money that could have gone toward other cases, including those involving people who were truly missing. There were also consequences beyond finances. Because of Sherri's claims, suspicion fell on Hispanic women in the area. Some reported being treated with increased distrust, even stopped by police. This wasn't just a false story, it was a harmful one. After her arrest, Sherri's family released a statement criticizing the authorities, describing the arrest as dramatic and unnecessary, especially in front of her children. They said she had always cooperated with investigators and expressed confusion over the charges. The court set bail at $120,000. After her release, she was placed under strict conditions while awaiting trial. Shortly after, Keith filed for divorce. In April 2022, he sought full custody of their children. In an interview, he described the impact of what had happened. He said their family had lived in fear, installing new doors, locks, and security systems, all because of something that wasn't real. He also said that Sherri had never apologized, neither to him nor to their children, and that he had seen no genuine remorse. Later that same month, Sherri Papini pleaded guilty. The court sentenced her to 18 months in prison, followed by 36 months of supervised release, and ordered her to pay approximately $300,000 in restitution. At the hearing, she apologized. She said she deeply regretted what she had done and that she couldn't fully explain why it happened. But the central question remained: why? Her personal psychologist, Dr. Stephen Diggs, diagnosed her with what he described as a self-destructive personality pattern. According to him, individuals with this condition sometimes create a parallel, hidden life to fulfill needs that are not met in their primary one. In his view, Sherri may have been seeking something simple and temporary, an escape, but lost control of the situation. A forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Ian Lamore, from the University of Arizona, offered another explanation. He studied the so-called pathological hero pattern, cases where individuals construct scenarios in which they appear as victims in order to receive recognition, sympathy, or attention. If driven by an underlying disorder, he suggested, it is often linked to narcissistic or histrionic traits. Seen in that context, earlier events begin to look less isolated. Years before the disappearance, there had already been reports of self-inflicted harm and accusations directed at others. Patterns that, at the time, may have seemed like individual incidents now appeared more connected. So could this have been prevented? It's difficult to say. What is clear is that the case had consequences far beyond one person. Sherri's story damaged public trust. It made people question real victims of abduction and violence. It also affected entire communities, particularly after her original claims about 2 Hispanic women led to increased suspicion toward others in the area. Cameron Gamble, who had inserted himself into the case as a self-proclaimed expert, quietly disappeared from public view. James Reyes said he felt terrible for helping her. He was never formally charged. He described Sherri as someone who blurred the line between reality and imagination. Her family, however, continued to support her, saying they loved her and believed in her innocence. Many people, on the other hand, felt the sentence was too lenient. Then, in the fall of 2024, the story shifted again. After her release from prison, Sherri Papini gave her first major interview and once again changed her version of events. Now she claimed the abduction had been real, but not as she had originally described it. Instead of 2 unknown women, She named James Reyes. According to her, he took her against her will and was responsible for everything that happened during those 3 weeks. In the interview, she explained that on November 2nd, 2016, she had agreed to meet him, but only to end the relationship. She said he unexpectedly showed up near her home, appeared unstable, and had been sending her alarming messages. According to her, he knew her running route and intercepted her there. What happened next, she says, is unclear even to her. She claims she does not remember how she ended up in his car. She described the following hours as blurred, saying she was in a state of shock and unable to recall whether she resisted, whether she was restrained, or even the details of the journey to his home in Costa Mesa. What she does claim is that, during the weeks that followed, he harmed her, cut her hair, deprived her of food, and caused the injuries later documented. When asked directly whether she consented to any part of it, getting into the car, staying with him, or the injuries, her answer remained the same. I don't remember, or know. And when asked the most obvious question, why she never named him before, why she told the story about 2 women, she said she had been afraid of him and unable to tell the truth. After her release, Sherri also wrote a book titled Sherri Papini Doesn't Exist, where she presents her version of events. And that leaves us here, with 2 completely different stories, both told by the same person, one supported by evidence, the other by her own words. So the question is no longer just what happened in those 22 days. The real question is, what do you believe? James Reyes, however, told a very different story when the FBI interviewed him in 2020. He said that Sherri came to him voluntarily, that she asked for help to get away from her husband, and that she stayed with him for 3 weeks, barely leaving the apartment. According to him, she hurt herself, cut her own hair, and eventually asked him to drive her to the side of the highway and leave her there. Sherri, in contrast, now claims that during those 3 weeks, other people were around. She says neighbours and friends of James saw her in the house. And that raises another question. If that's true, why didn't anyone call the police? Why didn't anyone recognize her as the woman the entire country was searching for? According to Sherri, James told them to stay quiet, and they were afraid of him. But there's another possibility. Those people may have known she was there, but believed she was there by choice, that she was hiding, that she had left on her own and didn't want to be found. After the interview, when the cameras were turned off, Sherri continued speaking. She said that she and her legal team were planning to file a civil lawsuit against James Reyes and hold him accountable. At one point, the interviewer asked her a direct question. Aren't you concerned that the people you're accusing could sue you for defamation? Sherri's response was careful. She said yes, but that was exactly why she chose her words so deliberately. She said she knows what happened, that she can tell her story, but she's cautious about how she says it. She also spoke about her children. According to Sherri, her ex-husband Keith has turned them against her. She claims that during phone calls, he stands nearby and tells them what to say. She even mentioned that her young son uses words like manipulative, words she believes a child wouldn't normally use on his own. At the end of the interview, the journalist made an observation that stayed with many viewers. She said that she wasn't sure the full truth would ever be known, but her instinct told her that something still didn't add up, that Sherri might not be telling the whole truth, not just to others, but perhaps not even to herself, and that leaves us with a story that never fully settles. If you found this case interesting, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what you think. Would you have believed Sherri if this happened today, or would you have questioned it from the start? And what kind of punishment do you think would have been fair in this case? I'd really like to hear your perspective. Also, if there are other cases you'd like to see covered next, leave them in the comments as well. Stay safe.